The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Krelthar home system, and for a moment, nobody on any of the ships could speak. They had known the enemy homeworld would be impressive, but nothing had prepared them for the reality of it. The planet Krelth hung in space like a jewel, larger than Earth and covered in cities that glowed like circuits on a computer chip. Orbital stations surrounded it in layers, each one a fortress capable of housing millions. Defense platforms floated between the stations, weapons pointed outward in all directions. Fleet yards stretched for thousands of miles, building new warships even as the human fleet watched. Captain Danny Miller stood on the bridge of the UNS Vengeance, Admiral Foster's flagship, and felt his stomach drop. They had come here to strike at the Krelthar heart, to show the Empire it was vulnerable. Looking at the defenses arrayed before them, it seemed like suicide. "Sir, enemy sensors have detected us," the communications officer reported. Her voice was steady, but Danny could see her hands shaking. "They're responding to our presence." Admiral Kate Foster stepped up beside Danny, studying the tactical display with calm, professional eyes. She had been planning this operation for 6 months, running simulations and studying every piece of intelligence humanity had gathered. She knew this would be hard. She was counting on it being hard. Easy victories didn't change wars. "All ships, this is Foster," she said over the fleet channel. "Remember the plan. We're not here to conquer this system. We're here to send a message. Stay focused, stay sharp, and trust your training. Today we show the Krelthar what happens when they threaten Earth." The Krelthar response was swift and massive. Hundreds of ships launched from the fleet yards and orbital stations, forming defensive formations around the planet. Alert signals blared across every frequency, calling for reinforcements from across the Empire. The humans had kicked a hornet's nest, and now the hornets were swarming, but Admiral Foster had planned for this. She wasn't interested in fighting the entire Krelthar fleet. She had specific targets in mind, and she had brought the right tools to hit them. "Execute Alpha Strike," she ordered. 50 ships broke from the main fleet, all of them carriers loaded with bombers and fighters. They launched their payloads and immediately jumped away, vanishing back into hyperspace before the Krelthar could respond. Left behind were 500 bombers, each one loaded with weapons designed specifically for this mission. Lieutenant Grace Carter piloted her bomber toward the nearest fleet yard, trying to ignore the defensive fire that lit up space around her. She had been working in signals intelligence before the war, analyzing radio transmissions and breaking codes. Then the Krelthar invaded, and she volunteered to fly. It turned out she was good at it, good enough to be chosen for this mission. Her target was Shipyard 7, a massive construction facility that could build 3 dreadnoughts at a time. Intelligence suggested it was currently working on the newest Krelthar warship design, something even bigger and more dangerous than anything they had built before. If that ship was completed, it could change the balance of the war. Grace's bomber shook as a defensive laser clipped its shield. Warning alarms blared in her cockpit, but she ignored them. She was committed now, locked on target and coming in fast. Behind her, a dozen other bombers followed, each one carrying the same type of weapon she did. They weren't nuclear bombs this time. Humanity had learned that the Krelthar had defenses against nuclear explosions. Instead, these were kinetic penetrators, bundles of dense metal rods that would punch through anything in their path. At the speeds Grace was flying, those rods would hit with the force of small asteroids. "Target lock achieved," her weapon system reported. "Release in 5, 4, 3. Grace fired and immediately broke away, pulling her bomber into a turn that made her vision gray out from the G-forces. Behind her, the kinetic penetrators streaked toward Shipyard 7. She didn't see them hit, but she felt it through her sensors. The entire shipyard shuddered, then broke apart as the rods punched through its structure and set off secondary explosions. "Target destroyed," she reported, her voice breathless. Moving to secondary target. All around the Krelthar home system, similar attacks were taking place. Bombers struck at shipyards, supply depots, and command centers. They avoided the planet itself, avoided civilian targets, but everything military was fair game. Humanity wanted to hurt the Krelthar war machine, not its people. Colonel Frank Peterson led his Marines in the assault on Command Station Alpha, one of the orbital fortresses that controlled the system's defenses. His team had trained for 6 months on mock-ups built from captured Krelthar stations, learning every detail of their layout and security systems. Now they were putting that training to use. The boarding pods hit the station's hull like hammers cutting through metal and atmosphere. Frank's team poured through the breaches, weapons ready and armor sealed against vacuum. They had practiced this assault 100 times, but practice was different from reality. This was real bullets, real enemies, real consequences for mistakes. The Krelthar defenders were well trained and fought hard, but they weren't ready for the close-quarters combat that humans excelled at. Frank's Marines had learned to fight in Earth's gravity, in mountains and jungles and cities where every corner could hide an enemy. Fighting in the corridors of a space station was easier by comparison. Team 2, secure the control center, Frank ordered over the tactical channel. Team 3, hold this corridor. Nobody gets past you. The fighting was brutal and fast. The Krelthar soldiers were strong and tough, but humans had something they didn't. Humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years, learning tactics and strategies in countless wars. They knew how to move as a team, how to use cover, how to outthink an enemy instead of just outfighting them. 20 minutes after the assault began, Command Station Alpha was in human hands. Frank stood in the control center, watching his tech specialists work on the Krelthar computers. They were downloading everything they could find, intelligence that would help humanity understand their enemy better. "Sir, we've got access to their defense network," one of the specialists reported. "I can see the firing solutions for every weapons platform in the system." Frank smiled inside his helmet. This was better than he had hoped. "Can you disable them?" "Disable? Sir, I can make them shoot each other if you want." "Do it, and send the data to the fleet. Admiral Foster needs to see this." Back on the Vengeance, Admiral Foster received the data from Command Station Alpha and immediately saw the opportunity. The Krelthar had built their defenses to stop an invasion, with weapons platforms covering every approach to the planet, but those platforms were all networked together, controlled from stations like the one Frank's team had captured. If humans could control the stations, they could control the defenses. "All ships concentrate fire on the remaining command stations," she ordered. "I want control of this system's defense network." The battle shifted as human ships struck at the orbital command centers. The Krelthar fleet tried to defend them, but Admiral Foster had split their attention. Half their ships were chasing bombers, the other half were trying to protect strategic targets, and none of them were in position to do either job effectively. Humans had learned the art of misdirection from thousands of years of warfare. The Krelthar were learning it now the hard way. Commander Helen Torres piloted her bomber on the final run of the mission, heading toward the Imperial Palace's shield generator. This wasn't about killing Krelthar leaders. That wouldn't end the war, would only make the enemy fight harder. This was about showing them that humanity could reach anywhere, anytime. The shield generator was the most heavily defended target in the system, surrounded by weapons platforms and patrolled by elite fighter squadrons. Helen had lost half her wing just getting this close, but she was determined to finish the mission. Not for glory or revenge, but because it mattered. Because ending this war was worth any price. She dodged through defensive fire that could have vaporized her bomber in an instant, relying on instincts honed through 2 years of combat flying. The generator loomed ahead, a massive structure that projected an invisible barrier around the palace. If she could knock it down, even for a moment, it would prove that the Krelthar leadership was vulnerable. "Weapons armed and locked," her systems reported. "Firing." The missiles streaked away, each one programmed with evasive maneuvers that made them nearly impossible to intercept. Helen was already turning away, pushing her engines to maximum as defensive fire converged on her position. She felt impacts on her bomber's hull, heard alarms screaming in her ears, but she kept flying. Behind her, the missiles struck the shield generator. The explosion was massive, powerful enough to be seen from the other side of the planet. For exactly 17 seconds, the Imperial Palace's shields were down. Humanity could have dropped a bomb on the building, killed the Krelthar leadership, ended the war in blood and fire. They didn't. Instead, they sent a message on every frequency the Krelthar used. The message was simple. "We could have destroyed your leaders. We chose not to. This war can end peacefully, or it can continue until both our civilizations are destroyed. The choice is yours." Admiral Foster gave the order to withdraw. The peace negotiations took place on a neutral world called Vaxilor, home to the Vaxil Collective. The Vaxil were an old species, one of the few in the galaxy that had never been conquered by the Krelthar. They had watched the war between humans and the Empire with growing concern, worried that the conflict would spread and consume other civilizations. When both sides agreed to talk, the Vaxel offered their world as neutral ground. Admiral Kate Foster arrived with a small delegation, traveling on an unarmed transport ship to show good faith. She had spent 2 years fighting the Krelthar, killing their ships and destroying their bases. Now she had to sit across a table from them and find a way to end the violence. It felt strange, almost wrong, but she knew it was necessary. Wars were won on battlefields, but peace was won in conference rooms. Praetor Zeknor represented the Krelthar Empire. He had replaced Admiral Vekthor, who had been quietly retired after his failures against humanity. Zeknor was younger, less scarred by tradition, and he looked at Kate with an expression that might have been respect. He had read the reports of the human raid on the Krelthar homeworld. He knew what it meant when an enemy could strike at your heart but chose not to. "Admiral Foster," he said, using a translator device that rendered his words in English. "You have proven your people are formidable warriors." "The Empire acknowledges this," Kate nodded. She had prepared for this moment, rehearsed what she would say, but now that it was here, the words felt inadequate. "How do you negotiate peace with an enemy that wanted to enslave your species?" "Praetor Zeknor," she replied. "We didn't want this war. Your empire gave us a choice between slavery and extinction. We chose to fight. Now we're choosing to talk. The question is whether your empire can accept that humanity will never be conquered." The negotiations lasted for 3 weeks. Every day brought new arguments, new disagreements, new moments where it seemed like the whole thing would fall apart. The Krelthar wanted concessions, territory, some way to save face after losing a war to a species they had considered primitive. Humanity wanted recognition, security, and assurance that the Empire would never threaten Earth again. In the end, they found compromises. The Krelthar Empire would recognize humanity's sovereignty over their territory, which included Earth, Mars, and several colonies in nearby systems. They would pay reparations for the lives lost and the damage caused. In return, humanity would share some of their military technology, helping the Empire defend against other threats in the galaxy. It wasn't perfect, but it was peace. And after 2 years of war, peace was enough. Back on Earth, people celebrated in the streets. They had survived against an empire that had conquered half the galaxy. Humanity had not only survived, but won. The cost had been terrible. Thousands of lives lost, cities damaged by attacks that had broken through the defenses, families torn apart by war. But they had proven something important to themselves and to the galaxy. They had proven they belonged among the stars. Captain Jake Morrison retired from active military service a month after the peace treaty was signed. He was offered promotions, medals, positions of honor in the new Space Force humanity was building. He turned them all down. He had spent 2 years fighting, and before that he had spent his whole life preparing to fight. Now he wanted to do what he had always meant to do, explore and learn about the universe. He was assigned to help Dr. Lisa Parker establish the first human embassy on a Krelthar world. It was strange work, teaching aliens about human culture and learning about theirs in return. The Krelthar were proud and traditional, slow to change, but even they recognized that the galaxy had shifted. Humanity was a power now, one that had to be respected. Jake stood in the embassy's observation deck looking out at an alien city under an alien sky and thought about how far humanity had come. 3 years ago, they had been alone in the universe, dreaming about the stars. Now they were living among dozens of species, trading with some, negotiating with others, and defending their place in the galaxy. Lieutenant Chris Bennett, now a major, helped train the first joint human Krelthar patrol fleet. It was awkward at first, teaching former enemies how to work together. The Krelthar pilots were skilled and disciplined, but they had trouble adapting to the improvisational style that humans preferred. Human pilots were creative and unpredictable, which made them good fighters but difficult teammates. Slowly, they found common ground. Pirates and raiders threatened the trade routes between human and Krelthar space, and both species had an interest in stopping them. Flying together against a common enemy helped bridge the gap that war had created. Chris led a mixed squadron on their first real combat mission, chasing down a group of raiders who had attacked a civilian transport. The operation went smoothly, combining Krelthar discipline with human creativity. When it was over, the Krelthar pilots actually thanked him, showing a level of respect that would have been impossible a year earlier. On Earth, President Margaret Cole addressed the United Nations in a historic broadcast. Every nation on the planet listened as she spoke about the war, about the peace, and about humanity's future among the stars. "We have faced our greatest challenge and emerged stronger," she said. "We have proven that humans can compete with civilizations thousands of years older than us. But more importantly, we have proven that we can do it without losing what makes us human. We fought with courage, but we also showed mercy. We destroyed our enemy's military, but we spared their civilians. We won not by becoming monsters, but by remaining true to our values." She paused, letting her words sink in. Around the world, people watched and listened, feeling pride in what they had accomplished together. "The war is over, but our journey is just beginning," the president continued. "We are no longer alone in the universe. We have allies and rivals, friends and enemies. The choices we make now will determine not just our future, but the future of every human who comes after us. Let us move forward with wisdom, with courage, and with the hope that made us reach for the stars in the first place." Dr. Kevin Rhodes continued his research, now working alongside Krelthar scientists in a joint facility on Mars. The combination of human innovation and Krelthar refinement led to breakthroughs that neither species could have achieved alone. They developed new propulsion systems, better energy shields, weapons that were more precise and less destructive. The technology that had been designed to kill was now being adapted to explore and protect. Kevin stood in his laboratory, watching a Krelthar colleague work on an equation that had stumped both their peoples for decades. They were close to solving it, closer than either species had ever been. This was the future, he realized. Not war and destruction, but cooperation and discovery. Humanity had proven they could fight. Now they had to prove they could build. Major Linda Gray remained on Proxima Station, now serving as a diplomatic liaison rather than a military commander. The Krelthar prisoners had all been returned to their empire as part of the peace agreement, but many of them had asked to stay in contact with their former captors. Some even wanted to learn more about humanity, to understand the species that had treated them with unexpected kindness. Linda received a message from Teklin, the young Krelthar soldier she had spoken with so many times. He was back home now, living with his family and trying to rebuild his life after the war. His message was simple but heartfelt. "Thank you for showing me that enemies can become friends." It wasn't much, just a few words from one former soldier to another. But it meant everything. It meant that the war had not destroyed the possibility of peace. It meant that understanding could replace hatred, given time and effort. It meant hope. General Nathan Brooks, looking at the latest intelligence reports from across the galaxy, allowed himself a small smile. The Krelthar had sent warning messages to every empire in their sphere of influence. The messages described humanity in detail, explaining their tactics, their technology, their unpredictability. The messages all ended with the same advice: do not provoke the humans. Nathan found it amusing that humanity's reputation had spread so quickly. They had fought one war, against one empire, and suddenly the entire galaxy knew their name. Other species were approaching Earth with trade offers, defensive pacts, scientific exchanges. Some came out of respect, others out of fear, but all of them recognized that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The best part, Nathan thought, was that humanity had earned that reputation without compromising who they were. They had fought like demons when they needed to, but they had also shown mercy when they could. They had destroyed their enemy's war machine while sparing their people. They had proven that strength and compassion were not opposites, that you could be powerful without being cruel. Around the galaxy, other civilizations watched and learned. The Krelthar Empire had declared war on Earth, seeking an easy conquest. Instead, they had awakened something the galaxy hadn't seen in thousands of years. A species that refused to surrender, that turned every challenge into an opportunity, and that would go to any length to protect their freedom. The war had cost humanity dearly. Thousands had died, resources had been exhausted, and the scars would take generations to heal. But they had gained something invaluable in return. They had gained respect, recognition. The stars looked different through the viewport of the UNS horizon. Commander Jake Morrison had been staring at them for the past hour, watching the distant lights and wondering if any of them held life. He had his answer now, and he wished he didn't. The massive alien ship hung in space before them, blocking out the stars like a piece of the night sky had gone wrong. It was huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built. Its surface was dark metal covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with their own light. Weapons ports lined its hull, each one probably capable of destroying the horizon with a single shot. Jake had been a naval officer for 15 years before joining the United Nations space program. He had faced down pirates in the South China Sea and commanded destroyers through storms that would have killed lesser crews. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. This was first contact, the moment humanity had dreamed about for centuries. It just wasn't going the way anyone had hoped. The communications officer, a young woman named Katie Brown, looked up from her console. Her face was pale and her hands shook slightly as she worked. She had been excited about this mission when they left Earth 6 months ago. They all had been. The Horizon was supposed to be a ship of peace carrying humanity's hopes to the stars. "Sir, they're transmitting again," Katie said. Her voice was steady despite her fear, and Jake felt a flash of pride in his crew. "Put it through," he said. The translation software kicked in, turning the harsh alien sounds into words that humans could understand. The voice that came through the speakers was deep and cold, without any warmth or emotion. It reminded Jake of a judge reading a death sentence. "I am Admiral Vector of the Krelthar Empire. Your species has been evaluated and found lacking. You will submit to Imperial rule within 10 of your planetary rotations. You will provide workers, resources, and obedience. Refusal means extinction. These are your only options. Respond when you have accepted your place." The transmission ended. The bridge of the horizon was silent except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Nobody spoke. Nobody seemed to know what to say. Jake looked at his crew. They were good people, all of them. Scientists, engineers, dreamers who had volunteered to carry humanity's message to the stars. They had families back home, people who loved them and waited for them to return. Now they were staring at a future where Earth itself might not survive. "Get me a secure channel to Earth," Jake said. "Maximum encryption, and somebody get me every piece of data we have on that ship." The next few hours passed in a blur. While Katie worked on establishing a connection with Earth through the relay satellites they had left behind, the rest of the crew analyzed everything they could about the alien vessel. Its size, its weapons, the way its engines worked. Every detail might be important. Lieutenant Dan Cooper, the ship's tactical officer, pulled Jake aside. Dan was older than most of the crew, a former Marine who had seen combat in 3 different wars. His gray hair and steady eyes had been a source of comfort during the long journey from Earth. "Sir, I've been running simulations," Dan said quietly. "If they attack us, we've got maybe 30 seconds before we're dust. Our weapons are designed for asteroid mining, not combat. We've got nothing that can hurt something like that." Jake nodded. He had already figured that out, but hearing it confirmed made it real. "What about running?" "They'd catch us before we could jump. Their engine signature suggests they're at least twice as fast as we are, maybe more." Dan paused, then added, "We're sitting ducks, Commander." The connection to Earth finally came through. Jake found himself looking at a screen filled with faces he recognized. President Richard Hayes sat in the center, his expression grave. Around him were the leaders of the United Nations, military commanders and scientists. Dr. Lisa Parker, the woman who had designed most of the Horizon systems, was there too. She looked like she had been crying. Jake delivered his report. He told them everything about the Krelthar, about their ultimatum, about the massive warship that could probably destroy the Horizon with a sneeze. He tried to keep his voice level and professional, but everyone could hear the fear underneath. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then President Hayes spoke. "Commander Morrison, you and your crew have done humanity a great service. You've given us warning. We won't forget that." He paused, and Jake could see the weight of command on the president's face. It was the same weight Jake felt, multiplied by billions. "Return to Earth as quickly as you can. We need to prepare." "Prepare for what, sir?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "War," the president said simply. "They've given us 10 days. We're going to need every single one of them." The screen went dark. Jake stood on the bridge of his ship, surrounded by his crew, and thought about Earth. He thought about the blue oceans and green forests, the cities full of people going about their lives. He thought about his sister and her kids living in California and dreaming about the stars. He thought about all the things that made humanity worth saving. "All hands," he said over the ship's intercom. "Plot a course for home. Maximum speed. We're going back to Earth." As the horizon turned away from the Krelthar ship and accelerated toward home, Jake looked back one more time at the alien vessel. It hung in space like a dark promise, patient and terrible. The Krelthar thought they had won already. They thought humanity would roll over and accept slavery without a fight. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Back on Earth, the emergency sessions had already begun. In underground bunkers and secure facilities around the world, scientists and military leaders were gathering. Plans that had been considered crazy or impossible were being dusted off and reviewed. Weapons that had only existed in theory were being rushed into production. General Nathan Brooks stood in the Pentagon's command center, looking at a map of the solar system. Red markers showed Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies. A single black marker showed where the Krelthar ship had been spotted. It was far away, but not far enough. "They think we're primitives," Nathan said to the room full of officers. "They think we'll be easy to conquer because we've barely left our own planet. They're measuring us by their standards, by how things have always been done in their empire." He turned to face them, and his eyes were hard. "They've never met anyone like us before. They've never fought a species that was born in war, that spent thousands of years fighting each other and learning from every single battle. They don't know what we're capable of when we're backed into a corner." He pointed at the map. "We've got 10 days to show them. 10 days to turn every weapon we have toward space. 10 days to become something the galaxy has never seen before. Let's get to work." Around the world, the response was the same. Factories that had been building cars and computers retooled to build weapons. Scientists who had been researching medicine turned their attention to military technology. Soldiers who had been training for Earth-based conflicts started learning how to fight in zero gravity. Humanity had been given a choice between slavery and extinction. They chose neither. They chose to fight. And the Krelthar Empire, ancient and powerful, was about to face something they had never encountered in their 3,000 years of conquest. They were about to face Earth's wrath. 2 years had passed since the first battle, and the war showed no signs of ending. The Krelthar Empire had promised to return with 1,000 ships, and they had kept that promise. What they hadn't expected was that humanity would be ready for them every single time. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UNS Retribution, humanity's first true battleship. The vessel had been built in the asteroid belt using resources mined from the outer planets. It was massive, nearly as large as a Krelthar dreadnought, and it carried enough weapons to level a small moon. Jake had gone from commanding a peaceful exploration ship to leading one of the most powerful warships humanity had ever created. The change still amazed him sometimes. "Sir, sensors are picking up a Krelthar patrol group," Lieutenant Katie Brown reported. She had transferred to the Retribution when Jake took command, refusing to leave his side even when offered safer positions. 3 destroyers heading toward Proxima Station. Jake studied the tactical display. Proxima Station was a former Krelthar outpost that humanity had captured 6 months ago. It was now a vital resupply point for human ships operating in this region of space. The station held 200 personnel and enough resources to keep a fleet running for months. Losing it would be a serious blow. "How long until they reach the station?" Jake asked. 40 minutes at their current speed, Katie replied. "Then we'd better get moving. Helm set intercourse. Maximum speed. Weapons, I want a firing solution ready before we drop out of hyperspace." The Retribution jumped, vanishing from one point in space and reappearing in another. Faster than light travel had been a dream for humanity, until they captured their first Krelthar ship. Dr. Kevin Rhodes had spent 9 months tearing apart the alien drive system, understanding how it worked, then making it better. Human ships could now jump farther and faster than their Krelthar counterparts. It was just one of many advantages humanity had developed during the war. They emerged from hyperspace directly between the Krelthar patrol and Proxima Station. The alien ships tried to change course, but they were too slow. The Retribution's main guns opened fire, sending streams of superheated plasma across the void. 2 destroyers died in the first volley, their shields overwhelmed by the sheer power of the attack. The third tried to run, but a spread of missiles caught it before it could jump away. "Target destroyed," the weapons officer reported. "All hostiles eliminated." Jake nodded, but he felt no satisfaction. Killing Krelthar ships had become routine, almost boring. They won these small battles easily now. The problem was that the Krelthar had hundreds of ships and humanity had to win every single battle. The Empire only needed to win once. On Proxima Station, Major Linda Gray watched the Retribution dispatch the Krelthar patrol with professional efficiency. She had been commanding the station's garrison for 3 months, and the work was harder than any combat she had seen. Defending the station was easy. The hard part was dealing with the Krelthar prisoners. There were 50 of them in the detention center, captured during the battle when humanity had taken the station. They were supposed to be the enemy, but Linda had trouble seeing them that way anymore. The Krelthar soldiers were scared, confused, and completely unprepared for the way humans treated prisoners. She walked through the detention center, checking on conditions as she did every day. The cells were clean and warm. The prisoners were fed regularly and they had access to medical care. By human standards, it was basic and humane. By Krelthar standards, it was incomprehensible. A young Krelthar soldier named Teclin approached the bars of his cell. He had been wounded during the battle, and human doctors had saved his life. Now he looked at Linda with something that might have been confusion, or might have been respect. It was hard to tell with alien faces. "Why do you do this?" he asked in broken English. The Krelthar had been learning human languages, trying to understand their captors. "We are your enemies. We came to conquer you. Why do you not kill us?" Linda had answered this question a dozen times, but she tried again. "Because you're not our enemies. Your government is our enemy. Your military leaders are our enemies. You're just a soldier following orders, same as me. When this war is over, you'll go home to your family. Until then, we'll treat you the way we'd want to be treated." Teclin stared at her, clearly struggling to understand. In the Krelthar Empire, prisoners were slaves at best, casualties at worst. The concept of treating enemies with respect was alien to them. But Linda could see it working on him, the slow realization that maybe humans weren't the monsters his commanders had described. This was humanity's secret weapon, the one the Krelthar never saw coming. Every prisoner they treated well, every act of mercy they showed, every time they proved they were better than their reputation suggested, it chipped away at enemy morale. Krelthar soldiers were starting to surrender rather than fight to the death. Some were even sharing intelligence, telling humans about troop movements and strategic plans. Back on Earth, Admiral Kate Foster stood in front of the United Nations Security Council, presenting her plan. The holographic display showed the Krelthar home system, with its massive defensive networks and fleet concentrations. It looked impossible to attack, and that was exactly why she wanted to try. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been fighting this war for 2 years, Kate said. We've won most of our battles, captured territory, and proven we can compete with the Krelthar militarily. But we're not winning the war. We're just not losing it." She pointed at the display. "The Krelthar think their home system is untouchable. They've never been attacked there. Not in 3,000 years of their empire's existence. Their entire military doctrine is based on taking the fight to their enemies. They don't know how to defend their home." President Margaret Cole leaned forward, studying the display. She had replaced Richard Hayes 6 months ago, after he died of a heart attack. The stress of leading humanity through its first interstellar war had killed him. Margaret was determined not to let his sacrifice be in vain. "You're proposing we attack their homeworld?" she asked. "That's 300 light-years away. We'd be completely cut off from support." "Yes, ma'am," Kate replied. "But if we succeed, we end the war. The Krelthar have never faced a real threat to their home. If we can strike at their heart, show them they're vulnerable, they'll have no choice but to negotiate. And if you fail," Kate met the president's eyes, "then we lose our best ships and our most experienced crews. Earth's defenses will be weakened for months, maybe years. It's a huge risk. But you think it's worth taking?" "I think it's our best chance to win this war without fighting for another decade." "Yes, ma'am, I think it's worth the risk." The debate lasted for 3 hours, but in the end the decision was made. Humanity would take the fight to the Krelthar homeworld. It was bold, maybe crazy, but that had become humanity's trademark. They did things no rational species would attempt, and somehow they made it work. The fleet began gathering at a secret staging area beyond Neptune. 300 warships, the largest force humanity had ever assembled. They came from every nation on Earth, from colonies on Mars and the Moon, from asteroid bases and orbital stations. They were crewed by volunteers who knew they might not come back, but believed the mission was worth their lives. Jake Morrison brought the Retribution to the staging area and watched as the fleet assembled. He saw old friends commanding other ships, people he had trained with or fought beside. He saw the UNS Defiant, battered from 2 years of combat but still fighting. He saw the newest ships built in the past 6 months using the latest technology. This was humanity's strength, he realized. They adapted faster than any species the galaxy had ever seen. Every battle taught them something new. Every loss made them stronger. Every victory gave them confidence. The Krelthar had 3,000 years of experience, but humans had something better. They had the ability to change, to learn, to become whatever they needed to be. Dr. Kevin Rhodes was aboard one of the fleet's science vessels, making last-minute adjustments to the jump coordinates. They were about to make the longest hyperspace jump humanity had ever attempted. If his calculations were wrong, the fleet might emerge inside a star, or in the middle of empty space billions of miles from their target. "Are you sure about this?" his assistant, a young engineer named Greg, asked nervously. Kevin looked at the numbers one more time. He had checked them 100 times already, but he checked them again anyway. Too many lives depended on getting this right. "I'm sure," he said finally. "The math works. We'll come out exactly where we need to be. And if the Krelthar are waiting for us," Kevin smiled grimly, "then we'll show them what humans do when they're cornered." The order came down from Admiral Foster's flagship. All ships were to jump on her mark. The countdown began, and 300 human warships prepared to leap across the galaxy to strike at the heart of an empire that had never known defeat on its own ground. This was it. The moment that would decide the war. Either humanity would win the greatest victory in their history, or they would lose everything they had fought for. There was no middle ground, no safe choice, just the jump into the unknown and the hope that courage and skill would be enough. The countdown reached 0 and the human fleet vanished into hyperspace. The 10th day arrived with a message that was only one word long. Earth's answer to the Krelthar Empire traveled through space at the speed of light, carrying humanity's defiance across the void. The word was simple and clear. No Admiral Vector received the message aboard his command ship, the Devastator. He had expected it, of course. Primitives always refused at first. They needed to see real power before they understood their place in the universe. He had conquered 17 species during his career, and they had all followed the same pattern. Defiance, destruction, submission. It was boring, really, but necessary. He gave the order to advance. 200 Krelthar warships entered hyperspace, emerging at the edge of Earth's solar system 3 hours later. The fleet was magnificent, a display of military might that had broken the will of countless civilizations. Vector allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as his ships formed their battle formations. This would be over quickly. "Sir, we're detecting multiple contacts," his sensor operator reported. The young officer sounded confused. "The primitives they have warships." Vector moved to the sensor display. Sure enough, 50 human vessels were moving to intercept his fleet. They were small, barely a third the size of his smallest destroyer, but they were clearly military vessels. How had the primitives built a fleet in just 10 days? He didn't know that humans had been building these ships in secret for 10 years, hidden in asteroid bases and underground facilities. He didn't know about the countless science fiction stories that had prepared humanity for this moment, or the paranoia that had driven them to prepare for alien invasion long before it actually happened. He was about to learn. Captain Amy Sullivan sat in the command chair of the UNS Defiant, watching the Krelthar fleet on her screens. Her hands were sweaty inside her gloves, and her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was it, humanity's first space battle. They would either prove they could fight among the stars or they would die trying. "All ships, this is Defiant Actual," she said over the fleet channel. Her voice was calm, even though every instinct was screaming at her to run. "Hold formation until they're in range. Remember your training. We're faster and smaller, use that. Make every shot count." The Krelthar fleet advanced, confident and steady. They didn't hurry. Why would they? They had done this 1,000 times before. Their shields could handle any weapon these primitives possessed. Their armor was nearly impenetrable. They were invincible. Then the first human missile struck. Nuclear fire erupted against the hull of a Krelthar battleship. The ship's shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and particle beams, did nothing against the physical impact of the warhead. The explosion tore through armor that had never been tested against atomic weapons. The battleship broke apart, spilling atmosphere and debris into the void. For a moment, the entire Krelthar fleet hesitated. One of their ships had just died. A primitive weapon had destroyed a vessel that should have been untouchable. It wasn't possible. 11 more explosions followed in quick succession. 12 Krelthar ships died in the first 30 seconds of the battle, killed by weapons that their builders had considered obsolete centuries ago. The humans didn't know about energy shields or advanced armor. They only knew about explosive force and kinetic energy, and they had gotten very, very good at using both. All ships break formation and attack, Amy ordered. The human fleet scattered like a school of fish, each ship choosing its own target and angle of attack. The Krelthar were used to fighting opponents who followed rules, who fought in organized formations and followed predictable tactics. Humans didn't know those rules. They had learned warfare in a different school, one where the only rule was survival. Lieutenant Chris Bennett piloted his fighter through the chaos, part of a swarm of 500 small craft that poured from the larger human ships. The fighters were tiny compared to the Krelthar vessels, barely bigger than a bus. But they were fast and armed with missiles that could hurt even the massive alien dreadnoughts. Chris had been a test pilot before the war, flying experimental aircraft that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. He had crashed twice and survived both times. Now he flew between ships that could swat him like a fly, firing missiles and dodging return fire that lit up the darkness around him. He was terrified and exhilarated and more alive than he had ever been. A Krelthar destroyer exploded to his left, victim of a concentrated missile barrage from 3 human frigates. Debris scattered in all directions, and Chris had to twist his fighter into a roll that would have killed him if Earth's gravity had been pressing down on him. In space, he could push his craft to limits that would have been impossible in atmosphere. "This is Red 7, I'm hit," a voice called over the fighter channel. Chris looked up in time to see one of his squadron mates tumbling through space, her fighter trailing oxygen and fuel. He started to turn toward her, but another voice cut in. "Red 7, this is Defiant. We see you. Rescue pod launching now. Red Leader, keep your people on mission." Chris forced himself to focus. He had a job to do. Saving his friend was someone else's responsibility right now. His responsibility was making sure more Krelthar ships died than human ones. On Mars, Colonel Sarah Hughes watched the battle through long-range sensors. She commanded the defense network that had been built into the Red Planet over the past 5 years, disguised as scientific research stations. Now those innocent-looking domes opened up to reveal weapons that could kill starships. "Target the cruiser at coordinate 773, she ordered. Her crew worked smoothly, trained for this moment even though they had never expected it to actually come. The railgun fired, launching a tungsten rod the size of a telephone pole at relativistic speeds. At that velocity, the projectile carried more kinetic energy than a nuclear bomb. The Krelthar cruiser never saw it coming. The rod punched through its shields like they weren't there, then through its armor, then through its internal structure. The ship folded in on itself, crushed by forces its designers had never imagined. "Target destroyed," Sarah's weapons officer reported. "Reloading. Find me another one," Sarah said. Mars had 20 railguns scattered across its surface, each one capable of firing every 3 minutes. That meant one shot every 9 seconds, and each shot could kill a Krelthar ship. The aliens had never faced weapons like these. They had never needed to. Every species they had conquered had used energy weapons, easily deflected by shields. Humans used rocks and explosions, primitive and brutal and devastatingly effective. The battle raged for 18 hours. Ships died on both sides, burning in the void or breaking apart under weapons fire. The Krelthar were more experienced, better armored, and more numerous. But humans were more desperate, more creative, and absolutely unwilling to surrender. Admiral Vector watched his fleet dwindle and felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. These primitives were supposed to be easy prey. They weren't supposed to fight back like this. They weren't supposed to be winning. "Sir, we've lost 60 ships, his aide reported. The young officer looked shocked, as if he couldn't believe the words coming out of his own mouth. "The primitives have lost 23. At this rate, I know," Vector snapped. At this rate, the primitives would win. It was impossible, unthinkable, but the numbers didn't lie. His fleet was being destroyed by ships a fraction their size, wielded by a species that had never fought in space before. "Order the fleet to withdraw," he said. The words tasted like poison, but survival mattered more than pride. "We retreat to hyperspace, now." The Krelthar fleet pulled back, breaking off their attacks and jumping away one by one. The humans didn't pursue. They couldn't. Their ships were damaged, their ammunition nearly exhausted, and their crews at the edge of collapse. But they had won. Against all odds, against an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy, humanity had won its first battle among the stars. Amy Sullivan sat in her command chair and allowed herself to breathe for the first time in 18 hours. Around her, her crew was celebrating, cheering and hugging each other. They had survived. Earth had survived. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they had proven something important. They had proven that humans could fight, and the galaxy would never forget it.